Not a research talk, but I will kind of give a broad overview of some of the research projects that we've done. And I'm excited to share more of that again over the next 2 weeks because I know we'll have a lot of time together to kind of go more in depth. And so kind of take notes about what's interesting and what you might have more questions on. We can spend some more time talking about it later on. So again, my name is LADD. I'm an associate professor of planning at the University of Arizona. And as I mentioned, the University of Arizona is a land grant institution, and so we do have the mission of research, education, engagement to serve our community and to make lives better. I thought I'd start off the talk though by talking a little bit about Tucson, which Dr. Mendel has visited before and lived in. And so I'm actually from Tucson, Arizona, so I'm a native. It's one of the oldest continually inhabited areas in North America. And so there's evidence of Native American inhabitation for 12,000 years. And those same tribes are still there today. Tucson is influenced by the history of Native Americans. It once was owned by Mexico, and then now, of course, in the United States. Its current population, much smaller than Patna, but 550,000, and our regional population is about 1 million. And we are in the Sonoran Desert, which is one of the most ecologically diverse deserts in the world. And so we are hot and dry, but we get a little bit of more rain than some other deserts, so we have a little bit more variation in our plants and life forms. We're a hot, semi-arid region, and temperatures range from 0 Celsius in the winter to 46 in the summer, but it can get up to about 50 as the record, so quite hot. And we do have what we call the U.S. Southwest monsoon, so not the same as your monsoon, which has quite a bit more rain, but we do get a lot of our rainfall for our monsoon in the summer. And we actually just celebrated our 250-year anniversary as a city. And so just some pictures here of Tucson. You can see the downtown area with A Mountain. A is for Arizona because that's our state. Centennial Hall is the kind of headquarters for the University of Arizona. You can see some of the cactus in front. Actually, just yesterday, I missed it because I was flying here, which is, I'd prefer to be here. But we have what's called Dia de los Muertos, which is the Mexican Day of the Dead. And so, who's seen the film Coco? Disney? Yeah, so it's like Coco, the Disney Coco film. So kind of a celebration of life and death. And so we have a lot of old traditions like Tucson, and then you can see kind of the Sonoran Desert there. So, and the reason I share a lot of this is because a lot of my research interests are shaped by the place that I grew up, which is kind of hot and dry and in a unique place, right? And so when I started my Master of Science in Planning program, one thing that I was interested, and this is quite a while ago, so I'm going to date myself, but was planning for climate change, because at that time, 15 or 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of resources available for cities on how to plan for climate change. You can see here some events that kind of shaped my thinking around it, but things like wildfires. So this is one of the wildfires near Tucson that happened in 2003. Hurricane Katrina is nowhere near Tucson, but was a nationally important event that shaped a lot of my thinking, and kind of watching the lower income communities suffer so much from the floods that took place. And then of course we live in an area impacted by mega droughts, and so you can see here the difference between the water levels where they should be and where they are now. So kind of the water scarcity issues that we're facing as well. The one question I had when I was studying all of these planning for climate change challenges was there were some resources available for wildfire, flooding, and drought, but what about heat? And so that was kind of the question that started most of my career. Heat is the fingerprint of climate change. We measure climate change through the global annual rise in temperatures, but there were no planning resources available for heat at that time. So that's kind of how I became interested in heat as a subject. We know that there are quite a few impacts from extreme heat. These are more well known now than they were when I started, of course. But public health impacts, quality of life impacts, economic impacts. Heat increases our energy and water usage. It degrades our infrastructure and urban systems. It harms our urban landscapes. It can harm our agricultural productivity, and it also has impacts on our rural and natural lands as well. And you can see here, I don't know if the pointer is kind of light, but you can sort of see it, right? You can see here, this was one of our record-breaking summers. We ran out of body bags that we filled with ice to treat people with exhaustion. So kind of that was one of the headlines. If you remember those saguaros I showed before, the giant tall cactus, they, under hot temperatures, actually collapse and die off. And so have seen some saguaros die off. And plus that's really important because saguaros are kind of the symbol of a resilient desert, and so to have saguaros collapsing because of the heat is quite a surprising thing. And then of course, heat impacts with agriculture as well. So just some of the local headlines from Arizona. I think heat is probably best known for its public health impacts though. And in the United States, heat is the #1 cause of weather-related deaths. And again, that wasn't widely known, it's becoming more widely known now. Heat illnesses and deaths, though, are widely acknowledged to be underreported. And so in Arizona, we do a really good job of counting every heat hospitalization or heat exhaustion case, but that's not the case in most other states. And I know other places have the same problems with documenting the heat health impact as well. Some studies have shown that we have about 12,000 deaths in the US due to heat already in the 2010s. But that number could increase to 110,000 by 2100, and so quite a large increase that we're seeing in the United States. But looking at a global scale, between 2000 and 2019, many studies have shown that there are approximately 500,000 heat-related deaths that occur each year globally. And so of course, I care about it because it's impacting Arizona, but it's also impacting the world in a great measure as well. And a majority now of those heat-related deaths are already attributed to the influence of climate change. And so this is just for the Phoenix region. And so Tucson is a little bit south of Phoenix. Phoenix is north of Tucson. It's a much larger city than Tucson. And it gets to be in the news quite often for its heat-related impacts as well, because it's also in Arizona. But you can see here the rise of heat deaths, and we track these very well, so these are very accurate numbers. 2023, we saw a 50% increase over the last year, and so had 425, and then that jumped up to 645 heat deaths. And so for Arizona, that was kind of the moment when our governor and a lot of the politicians said, now this is a serious health problem, you really need to address it better than we have been before. So again, we know that heat is increasing due to climate change, but also natural weather patterns and things like the urban heat island effect. And you're all architecture students and planning students, so raise your hand if you've heard of the urban heat island effect. Okay, a good number of you, that's good. So with climate change, every small annual average temperature increase that we see, and you can see here this small number kind of in the middle, it makes us prone to less cold weather, but you can see how much it increases our risk of more hot weather, and then kind of pushing us into more record hot weather too. And so that's really what we talk about when we think of climate change. People don't normally notice these small increases in the middle, but you notice the hot records that kind of come after that, right? And then the urban heat island effect for large cities, it means basically that the way that we plan and build and operate our built environments make them hotter than rural or natural surrounding countrysides. And so with heat, we want to think about both climate change, and we also want to think about the urban heat island effect, which is something that architects and planners can actually have a large influence over decreasing, right? And so we know that things like land use cover change can increase heat. The way that we build our cities with urban forms, so things like building height, density, and arrangement of buildings can increase it. The type of buildings that we use for materials, reflectivity, for vegetation and humidity, so the type of urban landscapes that we plan, and then waste heat emissions, so things like gasoline-powered vehicles and air conditioning all creates exhaust heat that also makes the air hotter around us. And then air pollution, unfortunately, traps all of that in. And so you can see here the kind of the daytime temperatures and the nighttime temperatures both increase in urban areas. And then another complexity of heat is that it's both and an acute climate risk. And so this was a 2021 Pacific Northwest heat wave that happened in the United States. So you can kind of see this dark red color. And that killed about 2,000 people over 3 days. And that's the same number of people that died in Hurricane Katrina that I mentioned earlier. And so a large number of people died from this climate disaster. But we have heat waves in the Southwest all the time, but it's always hot. So for us, extreme heat is not so much a disaster event, but it's always kind of present, right? And I would suspect that probably in Patna, it might always be present, right? It's always hot for a large portion of the year. You may have a heat wave that makes it a little bit hotter, but you think about heat all the time too, right? And so that might be a little bit more like the South. Like I mentioned, heat is complex, and so when I say heat resilience or what is heat, most people think of the air temperature, so maybe in Celsius, kind of on your phone, what it says the air temperature is. But how we experience heat is actually much different than what your phone says it is. And so there are different ways to measure and talk about heat, and I'll be glad to share that over the workshop, or if students have other questions later on, we can get into that more. But commonly, a lot of times in planning or architecture or climate, urban climatology, we look at things like land surface temperature maps to kind of see which areas the satellites identify in the urban areas hotter. That's different than what the ambient air temperature on your phone says it is, or what the relative humidity might say it is. And one thing to keep in mind is how a person experiences heat is going to be different than both the ambient air temperature and what a land surface temperature map shows, right? And so as a human being, if you're standing in the sun, you might have both the radiant heat from the sun, like lack of wind flow, and that might make your human body experience be, these are all in Fahrenheit, so apologies for that, but 87 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas your temperature might be lower inside, right? Because of the air conditioning or maybe cooler passive building. And you may even be cooler outside under a bus or under shaded trees. And everyone knows this kind of implicitly. But again, when the weather service says that it's going to be a record-breaking hot day outside, you may experience it very differently depending on where you're at and what you're doing. And so that's something to keep in mind. And what makes this hard